Recently quit my job at a fast food chain after working there for almost 10 months. This story is part of the reason why I did not want to stay much longer. I worked the drive-thru from 5 p.m. till 11 p.m. almost every weekend. Seeing regulars was not uncommon for me, and I would even memorize most of their orders and fill it out as soon as I heard their voice. Most people were very polite and occasionally tipped, but on one particularly busy day, there was an unfamiliar, weary presence. I just started my shift, so I was running food to the window. I made eye contact with the man at the window in his car and immediately felt uneasy. I brushed it off because we were busy and I had work to do. Later, once my manager set up my cash drawer, I took over drive-thru orders, payments, etc. There were a lot of orders, so I was not paying special attention to specific voices or menu choices, but one caught my attention. It was a low, hesitant voice, asking for a sandwich. I give the man the total, and he waits in line. He arrives at the window, and it's the man from earlier. I assumed he just forgot to order something. Now, his car was pretty low to the ground, so he had to extend his arm out to hand me his debit card. As he does this, he mumbles something under his breath without breaking eye contact with me. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I question.
"I said, you're looking beautiful today."
At this point, I'm super uncomfortable. Not only do I have a boyfriend, but I'm also underage and not at all interested. "Oh, thank you," I say nervously. I handed him the bag of food and quickly shut the window until he drove away. I half-heartedly complained about him to some coworkers, all male, as we usually do with weird customers, but I still had a strange gut feeling. A little while later, when the average wait in our line was about 10 minutes, I hear a familiar voice over the mic asking for a cup of water. It was low, but agitated and forceful. I saw his face through his windshields and walked away from the window so my manager would take care of him. This happened a couple more times that day, asking for straws and other free things. At that point, I was sure that he was just trying to look at me. I was so frustrated with him and the rest of my workday that I went to the bathroom and cried. I usually have pretty thick skin when it comes to this stuff, but I was just so over it. The rest of the night went on, and I did not see him again. I thought I'd probably never see him again, until my very last shift at the store a few months later. We weren't busy that evening, but it was much later in the day than the first encounter. I did not recognize the voice, but I immediately recognized his face and car. I swallowed my pride and took his payment, trying not to make eye contact. I called my manager, and he said that he would give the food out for me. As suspected, the man was back in the drive-thru not long afterwards for a cup of water. This time, I knew better. I sent a male coworker to the window to get it for him, since I was busy anyway. Once given the water, the man asked my coworker,
"You guys close at 11 now, right?"
I was so glad I was getting picked up by my mom that night. I was constantly looking out the windows and making sure he wasn't out there waiting for me. Call me paranoid, but I listened to enough true crime to be overly cautious. So, to the creepy man in the drive-thru with bloodshot eyes, let's not meet again. This happened to me a few years back when I was in my early 20s. At the time, I worked at a department store at a makeup counter. The job relies heavily on good customer service and building relationships because you want people to keep coming back to spend money on your products. We are given personalized business cards so that we can build our own client base, very important for a commission department. It's not uncommon to be familiar with the people who frequently shop in the store. As workers, our training is focused on being friendly and accommodating. One day when I was working, I had to move to a makeup counter that wasn't my own to cover someone's lunch break. It was a really slow day, so I was just leaning on the counter, people watching. I could tell most shoppers were just browsing, so I kept to myself. One of the people that I noticed was a very tall and broad man. He walked very slowly, almost hunched over. His face was fixed very aggressively, like he was angry but focused. He circled around the counter a few times, but I could feel his gaze on me instead of the products. After a few rotations around the department, I decided to greet him in case he needed help. It wasn't until he came directly over me that I realized just how big he actually was. I'm a 4'10", 140-pound female, so I feel pretty small regardless. But even with his slouched posture, he was over 6 feet tall and well over twice my weight. I'll never forget his teeth. They were completely black in the front. Your eyes couldn't help but go right to them. Despite his menacing appearance, he was soft-spoken. Truthfully, I could tell he wasn't all there by the way he talked. He told me no when I asked if he needed help, but requested my number, so direct. We had never spoken before. I declined and said that I was in a relationship and that it would be inappropriate. He then asked if he could have a business card for the counter in case he wanted to get products. Since I wasn't on my normal counter and I really wanted him to go away, I handed him my coworker's business cards and told him to call if he had any questions. It worked, and he walked away after that, filling me with relief. Only a couple minutes later, the phone on the counter rings. I answer with my preppy customer service voice and say, "Thank you for calling," makeup brand name. "How can I help you?" And immediately, I know it's the same guy when he starts talking. He asks me again for my personal number, and I explain once again that I cannot do that. But he just wants to talk, he explains. Since he wasn't getting the hint, I say, "I should have told you that I'm married. You can't have my number." Politely, he apologizes and hangs up. I thought that would be the end of him, but for the next few weeks or so, I spent much of my time at work anxious that he would show up. I would see him every week, and he would lurk around the counter looking for me. Anytime I would see him, I'd immediately drop what I was doing and run and hide, or run to the closest customer and offer any bit of assistance to make it look like I was busy so he wouldn't talk to me. I successfully dodged him every time, and it came to the point where I stopped seeing him. I was thrilled. I'd almost completely forgotten about him until one day I decided to go to Walmart by myself to pick up a few things on my day off. I generally like to shop alone. I can take all the time I need, and I like leisurely looking around. I grabbed a basket and made my way over to the cosmetic, hair, wellness section, since that's where most of the things I needed were. I only managed to grab a few things before I locked eyes with him as I walked by the supplement aisle. I'd recently changed my hair color and wasn't wearing my work uniform, so I didn't think he'd realize who I was. I was ready to just go about my shopping and ignore him until I noticed that he dropped the items he had in his hand and started heading my way. I panicked and stiffened my pace immediately. I thought to myself, he's not going to really follow you through the store, right? But as soon as I look around, I could see his humongous body just plowing through people with that same terrifying look on his face, only meaner, his black teeth growing closer with a snarl. Since the direction I was walking was the opposite of the exit, and there was no way in hell I was going to turn around, I decided that my best course of action would be to follow the perimeter of the store and cut down the center section, which would bring me close to the registers. I speed-walked the entire time in the hopes of losing him amongst all the people, but never once turning around again. By the time I made it to the register area, I could actually feel him behind me. Still not wanting to turn around to look, I glanced in the reflection of the soda machines that are in between the register aisles to see how close he was. To my horror, there was only about 1.5 to 2 feet between us. I was afraid to just drop my stuff and run out of the door in case he followed me to my car. I parked in the far back of the parking lot and didn't want to risk it. I also didn't want to get in line at the register since the lines were long and I would just be standing out in the open, alone. Instead, I walked to the cluster of people crowded around the self-checkout line. I noticed another large but older gentleman with his carriage in the middle and ran straight for him. The people were so closely clustered together that the man following me couldn't make it through. I ran over to the man in line and grabbed onto his carriage. I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm not cutting you, but there's a man that's been following me through half the store, and I need to stand with you." He was so sweet and let me be with him while we waited in line, and even let me go ahead of him so I could leave quicker. As I was cashing out, I could see in my peripheral vision my stalker staring at me and pacing about, but he couldn't come near me since the self-checkout is somewhat sectioned off. By the time I had finished and grabbed my receipt, I couldn't see him anymore. I looked around, but he was nowhere. I thought about asking the older man to walk me to my car, but he still wasn't finished at the register, so I decided to call my boyfriend and make a run for it. Staying on the phone, I explained to him what was going on as I sprinted to my car in tears, frantically looking around in case he tried to follow me outside. I made it to my car safely and rushed right home, breaking down to my parents about what just happened. I could feel it in my bones that that man wanted to do something to me, and thankfully, I didn't find out what it was. His aggressive aura was palpable. To this day, I can still remember the adrenaline, nervousness, the sheer terror I felt when he followed me. I'd never felt so vulnerable and helpless, even with all of those people around. I quit that job roughly 2 years later. I had only seen him one other time there since the incident, but I still live in constant fear that we will cross paths again. I'm afraid to shop alone, something that I wouldn't give a second thought to years before. So, to my stalker with the black teeth, let's not meet again. When I was 18, I got a job at Walmart. Small town, not much else there for someone fresh out of high school. I've been there about a month and worked in the jewelry department, usually from mid-afternoon until the department closed at 9 p.m. And I would close the department by myself, but obviously, Walmart is open 24 hours, so other people were always around. One night, I'm locking the cases up and putting things away, and an overnight stalker walks by and says hi. I look up, smile, say hi back, and then go about my business. This guy, the only way I can describe him, is to say he looks like one of the Bee Gees. Shoulder-length frizzy hair, kind of a bouncy hop to his step when he walked, mid-50s. This started to become a regular thing on nights I closed by myself. He'd walk by and say hi, and I would say hi back. That's it. No conversations ever took place. Then, on my birthday, a few of my friends who worked there got me a cake, and I hugged them and said thank you, etc. About an hour later, Mr. Bee Gees comes around with a birthday card and gave it to my manager to give to me. Manager thought it was extremely funny that this weirdo got me a card until I opened it.
Happy birthday. I saw you hugging those guys earlier. It made me really mad, but I called a friend and talked it out. And he made me realize you're allowed to have friends other than me. Just please don't hug them anymore. Save those hugs for me. I don't know what kind of emotion was shown on my face, but my manager grabbed the card and read it, and then walked me back to the store manager's office and showed it to him. Store manager said that the guy was obviously joking, but that he would talk to him about it. I didn't see Mr. Bee Gees for about a week, until one night when I was closing, he plunked down a stuffed envelope on my counter as he walked by without a word. Inside was 6 pages, front and back, of pure crazy. It was basically his entire life story, all about his family and schools he went to, but with weird stuff like how his sister was a psychic and his father was an exorcist and all sorts of weirdness. The end of the letter was about how his friend who was 18 months old was missing, and he knew she was being raped because he could hear her screaming his name in his dreams. What? So that also went to the store manager, and he had me write a written complaint. He told me not to go outside by myself, and not to wander near where the guy might be while I'm on my breaks. No? Get rid of him? 2 nights later, I was finishing up for the night, and the way that the counter is set up,
There's one opening, and the counters go all the way around both sides. He brought a handcart around with boxes for my department, but pushed it into the only opening in the counters, so I was trapped inside. He just stood there and stared at me while I looked at him with what I'm sure was pure terror. I was then, and still am now, riddled with anxiety. I don't like confrontation, and the last thing I wanted was for this weirdo to confront me about reporting him twice. He whispers, "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare ya." I turn around and started finishing my closing tasks, pretending he wasn't there, even though I could feel him watching me. After a few minutes, I just look at him and said, "Weren't you told to stay away from me?" He gave me this gross predator grin and said, store's manager's name, asked me if I was joking. I told him I was. Then he leaned in as close to me as he could get, with the counter between us, and whispered, "But I'm not joking." Then he walked away. For 2 weeks after that, he would randomly show up wherever I was. I would leave for lunch. He would be there. Even non-work places. I would go to the mall, and he would be there. Another department manager told me that he had been reported by 4 other people over the last 2 years for very similar behavior. I again went to my store manager, who told me that the guy was harmless and maybe had a little bit of a crush. He was in his 50s, and I was 18 to 19 during this crap. A week later, I gave my notice and quit. He still works there 13 years later. Still gives me the heebie-jeebies. Hi, friends. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you'd like to hear more from me. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful night. Please take care of yourself, and sweet dreams.